ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामज्जतव पवनचलनरोधात् आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्. Namo Ramana. We commence today's evening Atma Vichara session by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. We have been reading from the book Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950. Ramanas, it is Bhagavan's answers on the subject of Atma Vichara, self-enquiry, between 1900 to 1950, compiled by our founder president, Sri A.R. Natarajanji. In the question answer series, we have come to the 52nd question. After reading this question and meditating on that by Master's grace, we will have a 20-minute Atma Vichara session. Followed with that will be a talk by our President, Dr. Sharda Natarajanji, on Ramana Gita. And we can take any questions at the end. Question number 52. Devotee. Bhagavan, I have heard about your self-enquiry, but I have no clear conception of it. Is it to sit in a quiet place and ask oneself the question, who am I, repeatedly, or meditate on that question as on a mantra? I repeat the question, Bhagavan, I have heard about your self-enquiry, but I have no clear conception of it. Is it to sit in a quiet place and ask oneself the question, who am I, repeatedly, or meditate on that question as on a mantra? Bhagavan's reply, no, it is not repeating of or meditating on who am I. It is to dive deep into yourself and seek the place from which the I thought arises in you, and to hold on to it firmly to the exclusion of any other thought. Continuous and persistent effort would lead you on to the self. I repeat Bhagavan's answer. No, it is not repeating of or meditating on who am I. It is to dive deep into yourself and seek the place from which the I thought arises in you, and to hold on to it firmly to the exclusion of any other thought. Continuous and persistent effort would lead you on to the self. Bhagavan here is very clearly showing how he is a master of what the blessings that we have to convert it into an opportunity. Bhagavan often gives this story of a person who had to take a medication and was asked by a doctor not to think of the donkey while taking the medication, and any time he decided to take the medicine, he would remember about the donkey at that time, and he couldn't take the medicine. So he had a very miserable time. Every time he wanted to take the medicine, he would invariably think of the donkey, or the thought of the donkey would come to him, and he would not be eligible to take the medicine. So he goes to another doctor, and the other doctor says, okay, think of an elephant and take the medicine. So what was very natural to the person was thinking. Similarly, so the other doctor just used the same thing as a medicine, as a remedy to the problem. And though the remedy was that simple, instead of thinking of the donkey, think of the elephant, which is very easy. Thinking of something when it is so easy. So why not think about something that you want, which is not what you want to think about? Something like that. So Bhagavan here is saying the same thing. Every time we are complaining that when we sit in the meditation, then we have the thoughts, which is what we want to transcend, but they seem to be gushing out. He says, instead of inquiring about what should I do with the thought, what should I practice with that, use the same inquiry to find out to whom is this thought, to whom are these thoughts appearing. If I figure out that it is I, then who am I? So use the same inquiry as a means to, instead of looking for the remedy in the form of another thought, using the inquiry to go to the source of the thought. By using the same inquiry, which we are so comfortable with, Bhagavan is making us turn inward. That is the beauty about Bhagavan. And he is also saying here, to the exclusion of all other thought, continuous and persistent effort. Another important observation that we can make is that our mind, whatever it is so easily acquainted with, suppose if the mind is very acquainted with thoughts, it is very easy for the mind to think about the thoughts, isn't it? It happens effortlessly for it. So Bhagavan is saying, every time we make use of the same mind, instead of now attending to the thought, now it is going to the source. And every time it gets back to the source repeatedly, with continuous and persistent effort, then it becomes acquainted with the source itself, with the self itself. And then we know that Bhagavan has said that for him to think is very difficult. That is the nature, that is the real nature of the self, absolutely thought-free. How can we know that? In our deep sleep, the self alone is, and it is not really looking for where did I lose my thoughts. It is very comfortable, or whether it is equally shining at that point in time without a much of disturbance. Whenever it is the mind which is continuously hooked up to the thoughts because of its continuous and persistent thinking which it has undergone right now. So Bhagavan is asking us to use the same strength to turn it and make it persistent and continuously acquainted to the self. And by repeatedly acquainting it to the self, then the mind will lose its thinking. It gets absorbed in the self and completely loses this so called the difficulty that it is claiming that the thoughts are continuous and repeated. That is the beauty of Atma Vichara. Bhagavan here also says very clearly, dive deep into yourself and seek the place from which the I thought arises in you. If we dive deep and go to the source of the thought, because it is only as an individual that I start to think. When I rise as an individual in the morning, that's when this complaint of thoughts gushes with us. When there is no individuality, there is no question or no problem to deal with the mind itself. Therefore, by going to the source of the I thought and holding on to the source of it firmly, then we see that by naturally it is exclusion of all other thoughts. The self is at the exclusion of all other thoughts. However, if we are complaining that when I dive deep, yet if I go to the source of the I am not able to stay there with the exclusion of all thoughts, Bhagavan is saying here, exclusion of all thought means if a thought comes, inquire again to whom is this, who am I. That is the best way to exclude it. There is nothing else that we need to do. We need not have to think, what should I do to exclude it? Just inquire again the same thought repeatedly. Okay, how do I exclude? To whom is this thought to exclude? Who am I? By going back and using the same inquiry as the remedy, repeatedly, we are going to arrive at the source, and that is at the exclusion of all thoughts. And whether we do it with effort or whether it becomes effortless due to continuous and persistent effort, both are same. Whether it becomes natural, sahaja, or when we do it with effort. If somebody climbs the top of the mountain by effort, or if somebody is already positioned at the top of the mountain, both have reached the top. So Bhagavan is saying here, in the initial stage, when the vasanas are quite strong, it may be effort and repeated effort and continuous effort, but it doesn't matter. What we need to recognize here is that repeated and continuous effort is keeping us at the top of the mountain, which is where we belong to. And in due course, the mind will get acquainted to it and it will naturally remain in that silence. The immense grace of Bhagavan, who has blessed us this straight path and made us use our own strength, which we now think as weakness, as a strength to get, as an inquiry itself has the strength to get back to the self. With that beautiful path that he has blessed us with such love, and having complete faith on the path and on the master, let us do Atma Vichara. In Atma Vichara, as Bhagavan has clearly indicated here, no matter how many thoughts rise, what is the nature of the thought, whether it is good, bad, or ugly, we continuously inquire to whom is this, then recognize it is for me, and thereupon, who am I? Try to get to the source of the I. What do I refer to as I within? Or what is really, where from this I thought rises? And by repeatedly doing so, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain that strength to be at the source. And with the immense grace of Bhagavan, for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namo Ratna. Over to Sharda Akka.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining itself in all beings. By Bhagavan's grace, we are meditating on self-enquiry, on the practice of self-enquiry, and we are taking as support for this the Ramana Gita, which is like the Bhagavad Gita in 18 chapters. It is Upadesha of Bhagavan to various devotees, compiled by Ganapati Muni in Sanskrit. The way Muruganaraswamy has compiled Guruvachaka Kovai in Tamil. Similarly, Sri Ramana Gita has been compiled in Sanskrit, and Ramana Gita is Bhagavan's answers to questions during the Virupaksha years and the Skandashram years. And Guruvachaka Kovai we find is during the Ramanasramam years. And in the Ramanasramam years, we have talks with Ramana Maharshi, which is another major compilation, that is a prose compilation. And the Guruvachaka Kovai and Ramana Gita are in verse form. So we find that Muni first gives to us the magnificence of Bhagavan's words by saying that it is like the purifying Ganges. It flows down into our heart from Bhagavan and through the words of the one who records it. If we find in Bhagavad Gita, we find that it is Sri Vyasa, Veda Vyasa, who is recording the Bhagavad Gita. And the one who speaks the Bhagavad Gita is Sri Krishna, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So it is spoken by Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and it is recorded by Vyasa, and then later it is narrated by different people when the narration of Mahabharatam happens. So in this way, we find that the Gita, the words of Bhagavan, have been recorded by great ones. Earlier, in 1901, 1902, we have Gambiram Sheshayar and Shiva Prakasham Pillai recording the written words of Bhagavan. And here, Muni, Ganapati Muni, is recording the spoken words of Bhagavan. And he says that this Upadesha from Bhagavan is something which is flowing down naturally from him. It is not even an effort. He is not making an effort to speak. It is just coming from him. It is like flowing from his heart, the way a river springs from a mountain, very naturally it is coming. And very naturally it is flowing down, and it is reaching the heart of every devotee, and it cleanses. So while meditating upon that, we were looking at the analogy of the river, and we meditated upon the analogy of the river itself, and how the river is natural, how the river is spontaneous, how the river moves constantly, perennially towards its source. If we look at the journey as an effort, Bhagavan says in Appalam song, Santatam Salippara Santosham Agave. Constantly one has to keep at the practice. And constantly keeping at something may make us feel weary or tired. So Bhagavan says, Sadipara. One should not feel tired. One should not wonder, how long is this practice going to take? So these questions come when our attention is on the goal or on attaining something, and when our attention is on our own effort. However, if there is love for the practice, then what happens? Santosha Mahave. Joyously the practice goes on. Joyously the movement goes on. And even for this, the example of the river is quite apt, because whenever we look at the river, we feel a lot of joy. We feel there's a lot of natural, the bubbling, gushing movement of the river is there. With that force of, without even a second thought of moving in a particular direction, the river is just moving, constantly flowing towards the heart, says Muni here. So the attention, if it is constantly turned towards the heart, through the words of Bhagavan, as Bhagavan told us in his answer today, if our attention turns constantly towards the heart, using Bhagavan's words as a support. What words? The words that tell us turn towards the source. Bhagavan's words turn towards the source, become our support, and using that, constantly we have to turn towards the source joyously. The analogy of the river also brought home to us that in another sense there is no movement towards a goal at all, because the river is not one continuous entity at all. The river is changing from moment to moment to moment. So that takes us, if we look at getting back to the ocean as getting back to the source, the point that the river is changing from moment to moment to moment raises the inquiry, who am I? That this identity of ours, which we take to be constant, which we think has limitations, boundaries, and a definite existence, if we realize that there is no such definite existence at all, that this entity is changing from moment to moment to moment, then the question would not naturally arise as to what is my true nature, or who am I? This question again cuts away all the movements of the mind and naturally takes us back to the source here and now. If a river were to ask, who am I? The river would get the answer that I am only water. At all times, I am water. Similarly, when we ask ourselves the question, who am I? By turning intensely within ourselves, when we address this question to ourselves as to who I am, who am I? Then what happens is, because all answers are only part of a fluid existence, a fluid entity, there is no real continuous existence to that entity. So any answer we give is clearly not indicative of our true nature. This we would recognize, because any answer that comes up is for an entity. If I give myself any answer to the question, who am I? It would be Sharada who is giving these answers. And the question, who am I, is pointing out to me that I am not Sharada in the first place. So, what kind of answer can I give myself? Therefore, the attention would get back to that point where there is no attachment to any aspect of identification, where there is a total tentativeness, a total readiness to remain absolutely still because I do not have an answer. Any thought which arises, any experience which comes to me in the form of a thought, it would be dealt with, it would be seen as a mere expression of an entity that is passing. Anything can come to us. There may be any emotions that are experienced, but the moment that emotion is experienced, along with it, the question would arise as to for whom is this experience? And the answer would come, it is for me. But who am I? I don't know who I am. All these things which I take to be myself, I am taking to be myself. And they are changing from moment to moment. So who am I? Who am I? So the question will keep going back, taking us back to the source. Again, very beautifully in Appalam song, Bhagavan says, Kal nengil naan naan endru kalangamal unmuga ulakkayal oyadidithu. So without one can read this verse in this way, Nan Nan, Yendre Kalangamal Unmuga Ulakkayal, going on looking at the eye, or Nan Nan Yendre Kalangamal Unmuga Ulakkayal Oyadidithu. So we can look, keep on looking. So the river points out to us that there is continuous merger in the source, or there is this continuous entity. Both it points out to us. The continuous merger in the source is also happening in a river. The continuous movement towards the source is also happening in the river. And the total non-absence of identification of being an entity is also brought home to us by the river. So when our self-inquiry becomes like that river, Srotasa Samam, then it cleanses. What does it cleanse? Prabala Malaharin Yenupadam, says Muni. It is very famous. It can destroy strong or deep-rooted tendencies, which are the dirt which covers our awareness of the self. Actually, the self is ever shining. The self is not newly created, not even newly created by a practice. It is not newly attained, it is not newly created, but there is something which is preventing us from experiencing our own natural state. What is that something? That something is called also a veil, it is called the bandha, it is called darkness of ignorance, and that darkness is here referred to by the Muni as mala or dirt. Dirt has covered the purity of the self. The dirt is also impurity. Impurity has covered the ever pure self. What is an impurity? If you take milk, if we put water into milk, the milk becomes impure. I mean, not literally, we may not say the milk is impure. If a piece of dust or dirt falls into it, we may say it's impure. But even when water is put into it, it is actually not pure milk. It is a mixture, and therefore it is called impure. And when we boil the milk, what happens to the milk? What happens to the water in the milk? It evaporates. So that which is not natural to it leaves it when there is the boiling or the tapasya, the tapana, the heat. Tapas means heat. So that tapasya, when we perform tapasya, the impurities are washed away. But here, Muni is talking of the impurities being washed away by a river. So it is the grace, it is in a cool and soft manner without even giving us the rigor of tapasya, but making it for us very natural. Bhagavan makes it very natural, very beautiful. The process is made very natural because Bhagavan says, turn back to the I, because the I is so dear. It is the I which is the basis of everything that we do. Whatever we think of, whatever we do, whatever we want to do, whatever we don't want to do, at the basis of all this is our love for this I. And because we have love for it, it should be very comfortable for us to look at the I, says Bhagavan. If he is asking us to pay attention to something which we do not like, it may be difficult. But the I is dear to us. It is at the core of our very existence. It is for the sake of the I that we are constantly doing something or the other. But the fallacy is that we do not turn back and ask ourselves, I am doing this for my sake. Really, for what purpose am I doing all this? What is the purpose of my action? What is the purpose of my thoughts? The real purpose is to be happy, isn't it? And Bhagavan is telling us that happiness is our own nature. That thoughts are sorrowful because they take us away from our own nature. They pull us out from our own nature. So when we realize that the purpose is only to be happy, then wouldn't we tell ourselves, okay, if the purpose of everything that I do is only to be happy, and my own nature is happiness, and this self, which is happiness, which is by the very nature joy, which is by its very nature bliss, and this is awaiting me, inviting me from moment to moment, why is it that I do not turn to it? What do I really want? Do I want the bliss, which is my own nature? Or do I want something else? Do I want something else which is obviously sorrowful because it is disturbing the bliss of the self? So if we ask ourselves this question, then we would get the answer that it is the bliss that we seek, and we are only moving outward because of the force of habit. And this habit, as Dilip reiterated to us through Bhagavan's example of thinking of the elephant, the wrong habit of moving outside can be countered or must be countered through the habit of turning within, turning to the source, turning to the inquiry time and again, until the I recognizes the fallacy of moving outwards, and more than that, until the I experiences the bliss of the self more and more. And once it starts tasting of the bliss of the self, then I do not think we need persuasion to get back there. Because once we have tasted, the devotees, I think it is Pascaline Mallet who says that what has been experienced for oneself cannot be denied or forgotten. So we would not deny it to ourselves. Once we have experienced it, once we have tasted it in a steady enough manner for it to assert itself as, yes, this is the source, this is the bliss, this is what I want, nothing else. I am not seeking anything else. So until we experience that, we would have to put in some effort, some cajoling of the mind. All this which Bhagavan allows us, the satsang, the meditation on his teachings, everything is only to cajole the mind. And that is actually the purificatory process that he is allowing us to undergo. And as the mind gets purer and purer, as the water gets purer, as it gets clearer, and we can see the clarity in the pure waters of the mind, how beautiful it would be. Because when something is clear and pure, it always gives us a lot of joy. Even if we just clean a piece of dirty cloth, the moment we see it clean, it gives us so much joy. When we tidy our table, when we wipe away the dust from something, some surface, and we see it shining clean, it gives us so much joy. The same way, when we turn within and the mind becomes clearer and clearer, the turbulence in the mind settles down and dissolves into its source, then the joy of that experience itself would become reinforcement for us to continue until all tendencies to move outwards are completely erased by the grace of Bhagavan. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Are there any questions? No? There are no questions, I think. So, Dilip, will you say the prayer?
Yes, Akka. Aparasachit sukavarirashe yasyormimatram bhuvanam samastam guhahitam tam ramanam gabhiram chintavihinam hrudi chintayami chintavihinam hrudi chintayami. Namo. Thank you, Akka.
Namo Ramana. Thank you, Dilip.